Berkshire, England, around an hour away from central London, lies Broadmoor Mental Hospital. It was first founded in 1860, following the Criminal Lunatics Act, and only 3 years later did the hospital see its first patients enter its doors. Now, during its early years, Broadmoor took in a wide array of patients, especially during the crime spree that seemed to occur within these initial decades. In fact, boys as young as 10 were being sent, as covered in the previous episode, to the hospital. Children were stabbing, committing arson, and starting gangs. But it seemed as though it were not just younger folk who had gotten caught up with crime. The spree began involving those from all ages, and one day, Broadmoor found itself presented with a patient unlike any other they had encountered before. He was not a child, instead he was the exact opposite. At 78 years old, did their latest patient get sent in for murder. This is the oldest patient to ever enter Broadmoor Hospital. George Pursall was born around 1810, over 200 years ago. For a little context, this is 5 years before the Battle of Waterloo and the defeat of Napoleon, and a generation before the American Civil War. Very little is known of Pursall's early life. Few records exist of where he was born, or even what he looked like. Even though small, portable cameras had become somewhat popular, whilst he found himself in Broadmoor, they did not take a photo of their record-breaking patient. He may have looked like this, or perhaps like this. I'll let you decide. However, there are some things about George Pursall that we do actually know. For example, before his admittance to the hospital, he reportedly lived a quiet, peaceful life in Worcestershire with his wife, Harriet, and they had habited there for over 60 years. Pursall worked in his old age, keeping his job as a nail worker significantly into his senior years. He brought home enough to feed not only him and his wife, but a rather amazing 12 children. Very few events disturbed the Pursall's lives. George himself is presumed to have remained in England during the Napoleonic Wars, but the same cannot be said about his children. Regardless, despite a relatively uneventful life, January 1888 finally saw some sort of tragedy strike the Pursall household. The clock has just struck around midnight. Both George and Harriet were lying in bed, presumably sleeping. In a slumber state, George rose from the bed and made his way to the workshop where he worked, all in the middle of the night. Whilst there, he selected a singular iron bar and made his return to his house. And he crept back into the bedroom, standing over his sleeping wife, and in some sort of rage, he beat her with the bar until she was lifeless and dead, ending their 60-year marriage awfully abruptly. No one knew why George murdered his wife. In fact, his trial was largely confusing based on this. Not only was the absence of reason enough for the court to consider him insane, but his appearance did not help his case. It was reported that he was a shrunken old man, only 4'11" in height. He was bald on top, apart from a whiskery crown of white hair. As of this, he was declared insane and quickly dispersed to Broadmoor Hospital only 2 months later, in March 1888. This is equally surprising, as most cases tend to go on a little longer. Nevertheless, at the age of 78, and only around 2 months before his 79th birthday, Pursall had become Broadmoor's oldest patient. During his time in the asylum, Pursall's life continued of doing nothing notable, for no cases exist on his behaviour inside, suggesting it was not important enough to really document. He wasn't particularly dangerous, despite the matricide, so likely would have been placed on block 3 or 4, with a single mattress and a few personal possessions. His daily life inside the asylum would have again been rather simple. It's presumed Pursall would have undertaken similar tasks as to what he did outside of the facility. He would have likely used his skills of nail working and continued being a labourer with little sympathy from his age. He would have produced metal goods from the compound to disperse into London. Despite the vicious beatings he gave to his wife though, he would not serve justice for long, for he succumbed to the old age only 2 years later, ending his life inside the asylum at 80 years old. Never once did he reveal the reason for the killing of his wife so suddenly after 60 years of happy marriage, and I suppose we will never find out. But why do you think he killed his wife? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. It's free and it really helps me out. See you next time.